Alina Carter sat motionless at the edge of her bed, her white silk robe crumpled around her like fallen petals. Her hands trembled as she clutched the gold-embossed wedding invitation. It should have been the happiest day of her life, but it felt more like a funeral. Her father's voice echoed in her head, insisting this was the only way. If she didn't marry Damian Blackwood, they would lose everything. Their house, the business, their name. Damian Blackwood, a billionaire tech tycoon, cold as marble and twice as unforgiving. Known for his ruthlessness in business and emotional detachment in relationships, his name was synonymous with power. And now, her name would be hyphenated to his. It all happened so fast. Just a week ago, she was serving coffee at her father's struggling bookstore cafe. Now, she was married to a man who could buy cities and burn them down, just to watch the ashes fall. The wedding had been lavish. Of course it was. A rented cathedral, imported orchids, a Parisian gown, no expense spared. Yet it all felt soulless. There had been no joy in his eyes when he said "I do," no tremble in his voice as he slipped the ring on her finger, just a curt nod, like finalizing a deal. Alina hadn't cried then. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. But now, hours later, in the vast penthouse suite of his Manhattan high-rise, she was alone. She wandered through the pristine space, glass walls, steel accents, cold white marble floors. Beautiful, immaculate, but nothing like home. It felt like a cage. The bedroom door clicked open. Startled, she turned to see Damian walk in. He had changed out of his tuxedo and into a crisp black shirt with rolled-up sleeves. No tie. He looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. Dark hair, sharp jawline, unreadable expression. He didn't smile. Not even a flicker. He spoke with a voice as cool and polished as his appearance, asking if everything had met her expectations. Alina straightened, bitterness edging her words, as she questioned whether he meant the ceremony or the part where she signed her life away. Unfazed, he walked to the minibar and poured himself a glass of bourbon, telling her calmly that he didn't believe in false promises. Their marriage was a calculated arrangement. She would help restore his public image, and in return he would save her family from financial ruin. A mutually beneficial deal. She flinched at the detachment in his voice, asking if that was all she meant to him. A transaction. He turned, sipped his drink, and confirmed it was better this way. Expectations ruined people. He wouldn't pretend to love her. He wouldn't ask anything of her. She would have her own suite, her own space, and all the wealth she could want. But affection? Togetherness? Those were off the table. Civility was all he could offer. Her heart sank, and she asked if that meant they wouldn't even share a room. He set his glass down and told her plainly. They wouldn't share a bed. Not tonight. Not ever. He didn't believe in pretending. Silence stretched between them, heavy and unbearable. Alina forced the lump in her throat down and asked why he even bothered marrying her. His gaze darkened as he explained that appearances were everything in his world. A grieving bachelor raised too many questions. Investors trusted a man who looked stable. She had been convenient. The word hit her like a slap. She turned away, gripping the windowsill as she stared out at the city below, vibrant and alive. Everything she wasn't. She whispered that she wasn't a doll. She had feelings. She was a person. He didn't respond. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she held them back. She wouldn't cry in front of him. He bid her good night, calling her Mrs. Blackwood, and turned to leave. Just before he reached the door, she found her voice again and told him he didn't have to be cruel. He paused, something flickering across his face. Was it regret? Pain? She couldn't tell, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. His final words cut deeper than anything else. That true cruelty would have been letting her believe this could ever be something more. Then he walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Alina stood frozen in the silence, the weight of it crashing over her. This was her wedding night, the moment little girls dream of, and she was standing in a stranger's penthouse wearing a $1,000 robe, feeling like a ghost in her own life. She walked to the bed, sat down, and finally let the tears fall. Not because he didn't touch her, not because he was cold, but because some part of her had still hoped for a miracle, a crack in his armor, a flicker of warmth, a reason to believe this might not be a complete nightmare. But now she knew. She had married a man who had locked his heart away and thrown away the key. The mornings at the Blackwood estate were quiet, eerily so. No laughter, no footsteps, just the hum of air conditioning and the occasional clink of cutlery from the sprawling kitchen downstairs. Alina sat alone at the breakfast table, dressed in a soft mauve cashmere sweater and cream leggings. The chef had prepared a lavish spread, Belgian waffles, fresh fruit, hand-whipped butter, but she barely touched it. What good was luxury when your heart felt empty? Her wedding ring, heavy and glinting in the light, felt like a shackle. Damian hadn't spoken to her since that night. They had become polite strangers, passing each other in long, echoing hallways. He kept to his study, or left for meetings in his blacked-out car. When he returned, she heard the creak of the front door and the distant murmur of his voice on late-night calls, but never to her. The staff treated her with rehearsed respect, always addressing her as Mrs. Blackwood, but behind their eyes was curiosity and pity. Everyone wondered what kind of marriage this was. So did she. On the third morning, Alina ventured into the garden, a manicured maze of marble fountains and blood-red roses. She found herself wandering into the glass greenhouse tucked at the corner of the estate. The moment she stepped inside, warmth embraced her. The scent of earth and blooming jasmine wrapped around her like a hug. It was the only place that felt alive. She didn't know how long she sat there on the wooden bench, eyes closed, letting the sun kiss her skin. But when she heard footsteps, she opened her eyes quickly and froze. Damian stood at the entrance. His black coat was dusted with fine snow. He looked surprised to see her, his usual cool demeanor briefly flickering into something softer. He said he didn't think anyone used this space. Alina straightened and told him it was the only place in the mansion that felt real. He walked in cautiously and said his mother built it. Alina blinked. It was the first personal thing he'd said to her since the wedding. He continued, explaining that his mother had loved plants and believed they were the only thing that bloomed no matter how cold the world became. Alina tilted her head and asked if that was where he got it from. The cold. He glanced at her sharply. She didn't back down, telling him she was tired of pretending this was normal. She sat alone every day in a house full of strangers, and he treated her like she was invisible. Why marry her just to ignore her? His jaw clenched as he reminded her he hadn't promised affection. She responded that he had promised civility, but silence wasn't civil. It was punishment. For a moment, silence hung between them like a curtain. Then, to her surprise, he sat down beside her. He said she thought he was heartless. She folded her arms and asked if he blamed her. He was quiet, watching the sunlight filter through the glass ceiling. He confessed that he once believed in love, deeply, stupidly. Alina's gaze softened, and she asked what happened. He looked down, his voice tight, and told her he was going to marry someone once. He gave her everything, his heart, his future, his trust. 1 week before the wedding, he found out she was working with his rival. It was all a setup. She wanted access to his research, his reputation. When he confronted her, she laughed and said she could have destroyed him if she wanted to. Alina's breath caught. Damian continued, voice low, that after that, he swore he'd never love again. He became the man the world expected him to be. Cold, untouchable. And it worked. No one could hurt him again. Alina was quiet for a while, then whispered that he hurt himself every day. He looked at her then, really looked, like he was seeing her for the first time. He said she didn't know him. She replied that she would like to. That moment hung in the air like a heartbeat. But then he stood abruptly, saying he had a meeting. Just like that, the wall was back up. He warned her not to waste time trying to change him. She deserved better. As he disappeared down the path, the echo of his words lingered. You deserve better. She didn't know if it was guilt or protection that made him say it. But for the first time, she saw the cracks in his armor. The man behind the billionaire. The boy who once believed in love and had it shattered. That night, Alina sat by her bedroom window, staring at the moonlight reflecting on the frozen lake outside. She didn't want his money. She didn't want the mansion. She just wanted to be seen. Not as a pawn in a business deal, but as a woman, as his wife. She wanted to believe there was still warmth inside him, buried beneath the frost. And for the first time since the wedding, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the wedding, and the tension inside the Blackwood mansion had evolved into something quieter, less hostile, more aching. Alina was no longer afraid of Damian, but she still didn't understand him. She could feel it every time their eyes met across the breakfast table, the invisible pull between them. Words unsaid, feelings restrained. His silence wasn't as sharp anymore. It was hollow, heavy, and that made it worse. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, she found herself standing outside his study, her hand raised, knuckles hovering over the door. She knocked. He told her to come in. Damian sat behind his massive oak desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes scanning a document, but they lifted the moment he saw her. For the first time, she noticed a flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected her to seek him out. She said she needed to talk to him. He asked what it was about. She drew a shaky breath and said it was about the wedding night. His expression hardened instantly. Alina held up a hand to stop him. She wasn't there to beg or to fight. She just needed to know why. He said he thought he'd explained himself. She told him he had only shared what he believed, that love is dangerous, that people betray, but he never told her why he treated her like a stranger. He didn't even look at her that night. He married her and walked away without a word. She asked what really happened. He leaned back in his chair, the storm outside casting shadows across his face. For a long time he didn't speak. Then he stood and walked to the window, staring at the rain. He said she reminded him of her. Alina's breath caught. He clarified, not in appearance, but in spirit. The first time he saw Alina walking into that contract meeting with her father, he saw fire in her eyes, strength. She had that too, until it was all a lie. Alina stepped closer. She said he was punishing her for someone else's betrayal. He snapped that he was protecting himself from repeating history. She said she wasn't her. He didn't even know her. He never gave her a chance to be anything except convenient. His eyes burned into hers as he said he didn't want a chance. He didn't want a wife. She asked why he married her then. He shouted that it was easier than trusting anyone again. The room fell into shocked silence. His chest rose and fell quickly. He looked at her as if she had cracked open the part of him he kept buried. He told her he didn't walk away on their wedding night because he hated her. He walked away because the moment he looked into her eyes, he wanted to feel something. And that terrified him. Tears welled in Alina's eyes. She asked why he didn't tell her, why hurt her in silence. He answered that silence was safer than hope. She stared at him, at the wounded, bitter man who still wore his pain like armor. But now she saw him. Not the billionaire, not the cold-hearted tycoon, just a man, lonely, broken, terrified to love again. She told him she cried that night, not because he didn't touch her, but because she thought she wasn't worth being loved. Damian's face twisted in pain. He told her not to say that. She said it was true. But now she understood he was crying too, just on the inside. She walked toward him slowly. She told him she didn't want the marriage either, not like this. But she was here. She was still standing in front of him. And all she asked was one thing: don't shut her out. He looked down, then reached out hesitantly. His fingers brushed hers, just a touch, but enough to send warmth through her veins. He admitted he didn't know how to be anything other than guarded. She told him she would teach him. Damian let out a shaky breath like he'd been holding it for years. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. He said he didn't deserve her. Alina smiled through her tears and told him he deserved more than what he'd settled for. He deserved real love. The thunder rumbled louder, but inside the room, it was quiet. Safe. Damian cupped her face gently, his eyes filled with emotion. He said that night, he locked the door to protect himself. Tonight he opened it, if she would still walk in. Her lips trembled. She told him she never left. He kissed her then, soft, uncertain, and full of all the words he hadn't spoken. It wasn't the kiss of a billionaire used to control. It was the kiss of a man finally letting go. Later they sat together by the fire, wrapped in one blanket, hands entwined. No pretense, no contracts. Just two hearts finding each other after surviving the wreckage of pain. And as rain tapped gently against the windows, Damian whispered an apology for their wedding night. Alina smiled and rested her head on his chest. Then let's rewrite the story. Starting now. 6 months later, the Blackwood estate had changed, not in architecture but in atmosphere. Where once the halls echoed with silence, now soft piano music floated in the background. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon most mornings, and in the garden, laughter often bloomed louder than the roses. Alina stood barefoot in the greenhouse, watering the lavender she had planted in Damian's mother's memory. She wore a simple summer dress, her long curls tied in a loose bun. A sparkle danced in her eyes that hadn't been there the day she first walked into this mansion. Behind her, Damian approached quietly, wrapping his arms around her waist. He murmured against her shoulder that she was up early. She smiled, leaning into his warmth, and said the lavender waited for no one. He chuckled softly, adding that neither did his wife. They stood in silence for a moment, taking in the fragrance, the sunlight, the peace. Damian had changed, not completely, not overnight, but in the quiet, intentional ways that mattered. He kissed her good morning now. He held her hand in public. He learned to apologize, to listen, and most importantly, to let love in. The board of directors had questioned his sudden shift in priorities, fewer late nights, more canceled trips, but his business continued to thrive. It turned out, when a man's heart is full, his mind is sharper too. Alina turned to face him and asked if he knew what today was. He raised a brow and guessed Monday. She reminded him it was their 6-month anniversary. He looked sheepish, thinking it was next week. She laughed and said he remembered last month, and that was what counted. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, revealing a delicate gold necklace with a tiny key pendant. She asked what it was for. His gaze turned tender as he told her it was for the heart she unlocked. Tears shimmered in her eyes, and she told him he was really learning. He pulled her close, saying he had the best teacher. As they kissed, sunlight poured through the glass roof above them, casting warm, golden light over their tangled shadows. There had been no fairy godmother, no magic wand, just two broken people, choosing each other, one day, one breath, one scar at a time. And as they stood in the greenhouse, where pain had once bloomed, love now grew wild and free. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Bye. See you in our next video.